Rich CEO pretended her card, declined at single dad's store, then security cameras revealed everything. She thought she was testing a broke dad's kindness, but when the footage played back, the truth left an entire town gasping and her perfect life burning to the ground. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun crept over Maplewood's tired streets, casting long shadows across the faded storefront of Turner's Groceries. Eli Turner stood at the entrance, key in hand, while his 8-year-old daughter Lila hopped from one foot to the other beside him. "Can I turn the sign today, Daddy?" Lila asked, her pigtails bouncing with each hop. Eli smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Sure thing, sweetie." He unlocked the door, and the familiar bell chimed above them, a sound that used to herald bustling morning crowds but now often echoed through an empty store. Lila darted inside, her sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. She reached up on her tiptoes to flip the closed sign to open, then beamed with pride. "All done." Eli's heart squeezed. Her smile was just like her mother's, bright enough to light up the whole store. He moved behind the counter, pulling out yesterday's ledger. The numbers stared back at him, each column more discouraging than the last. The morning light filtered through dusty windows, highlighting the half-empty shelves. Where fresh produce once overflowed, only a few tired apples and oranges remained. The canned goods aisle showed growing gaps, like missing teeth and a forced smile. "Time to wake up, old Betty," Eli said, patting the ancient cash register. The machine had been here since his wife's parents owned the store, and Sarah had refused to replace it. "It has character," she'd always said. Lila giggled. Old Betty's extra sleepy today. She watched as Eli pressed various keys, trying to unstick the drawer. It finally popped, open with a loud clang. The morning wore on slowly. Mrs. Henderson came in for her weekly bread and eggs, counting out pennies from her change purse. Eli pretended not to notice when she put back the coffee she clearly wanted but couldn't afford. "Here," he said, slipping a small bag of coffee beans into her basket. These were on sale, practically giving them away. Mrs. Henderson's eyes welled up. "Bless you, Eli. Sarah raised you right." As she left, Lila tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, those weren't on sale." "No," he admitted, "but sometimes being kind is more important than making money." He ruffled her hair. "That's what your mama always said." The memory of Sarah hit him hard. She'd stand behind this very counter, greeting everyone by name, remembering their children's birthdays, setting aside special items for regular customers. "Kindness always comes back around," she'd say, and she'd believed it with her whole heart. By midday, the silence in the store felt heavy. Eli straightened already neat shelves, trying to make them look fuller than they were. Bills were stacked in his office. Utilities, suppliers, repairs needed for the freezer unit. Each one felt like another stone on his shoulders. "Daddy?" Lila's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She sat at the small table in the corner where she usually did her homework, coloring instead of solving math problems. "Do you think Mama can see us from heaven?" Eli's throat tightened. "I'm sure she can, sweetheart." "Then she must be sad sometimes," Lila said, her crayon moving in careful circles. "Because you look sad a lot." The simple observation struck him like a physical blow. He crossed to her table and knelt beside her chair. "I miss her," he admitted, "but I'm not sad all the time. How could I be? I have you." Lila wrapped her arms around his neck, and he breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. For a moment, he felt Sarah's presence so strongly it almost brought him to his knees. The faith she'd had in God, in people, in the simple power of doing good seemed to fill the store like sunshine. The afternoon dragged. 2 teenagers bought sodas. An elderly man purchased cat food. Each transaction made the old register stick worse than before. Eli found himself talking to it, the way Sarah used to. "Come on, old Betty, just a few more hours." As evening approached, Lila helped him straighten up, humming a tune Sarah used to sing. Together, they wiped down counters, checked expiration dates, and swept the floors, their nightly ritual. "Time to head home, princess," Eli said finally. "Got homework to finish?" "Just reading," Lila said, gathering her backpack. "Can we have mac and cheese tonight?" "You got it." Eli locked up, then drove them home in his old pickup truck. Their small house was just 3 blocks away, a modest place with peeling paint, but filled with love. After dinner, Eli tucked Lila into bed, making sure her favorite stuffed rabbit was tucked in beside her. "Prayer time?" Lila nodded, folding her hands. "Dear God, please help Daddy's store get more customers. And please tell Mama we miss her. And thank you for mac and cheese. Amen." "Amen," Eli echoed, kissing her forehead. "Sweet dreams, baby girl." Back in the kitchen, he pulled out the day's earnings to count. The small pile of bills and change added up to exactly $48. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. A car's headlights swept across the kitchen wall as someone drove past, and Eli thought about Sarah's words again. "Kindness always comes back around," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "I'm trying to believe that, Sarah. I really am." The morning sky darkened over Turner's Groceries as storm clouds gathered, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Thunder rolled in the distance, a low growl that made the old building's windows rattle. Eli was straightening cans of soup when he heard it, the purr of an expensive engine, so different from the usual pickup trucks and beat-up sedans that frequented his parking lot. Through the rain-streaked windows, he watched a sleek gray Mercedes ease to a stop, its metallic paint gleaming even in the dim morning light. The car looked completely out of place, like a diamond dropped in a box of pennies. The woman who stepped out moved quickly, protecting her designer blazer from the first heavy drops of rain. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she hurried toward the entrance, one hand clutching a leather handbag that probably cost more than Eli's monthly revenue. The bell above the door chimed as Charlotte Vale swept in, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and the crackle of frustrated energy. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her expression was pure irritation as she jabbed at her phone screen. "Stupid GPS," she muttered, then looked up, seeming startled to find herself in such a modest establishment. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in the faded signs, the slightly dusty shelves, the ancient cash register. "Welcome to Turner's," Eli said warmly, the same way he greeted everyone who walked through his door. "Can I help you find anything?" Charlotte's shoulders tensed slightly, as if kindness was something she'd grown unaccustomed to. "I'm rather lost, actually. The highway should be nearby, but this ridiculous app." She waved her phone in frustration. "Technology, right?" Eli smiled, reaching for the coffee pot that was always brewing. "How about some coffee while we figure out where you're headed? On the house." Thunder crashed overhead, making the fluorescent lights flicker. Charlotte jumped slightly, then tried to cover it with a small cough. "I suppose I could use a moment to get my bearings." Eli poured the coffee into one of the mismatched mugs his wife had collected over the years, this one decorated with cheerful yellow daisies. Charlotte accepted it with perfectly manicured fingers, her expression softening just slightly at the warmth. "I should pick up a few things while I'm here," she said, more to herself than to Eli. "Who knows how long this storm will last?" She moved through the store with efficient grace, selecting items with the precision of someone used to getting exactly what they want. Bottled water, premium crackers, a few pieces of fresh fruit. The lights flickered again as she made her way back to the counter. Eli rang up her purchases, trying not to notice how her designer watch caught the light or how out of place she looked against the backdrop of his humble store. "That'll be $37 even, ma'am." Charlotte reached into her handbag, pulling out a black credit card that looked as expensive as everything else about her. She swiped it through the old card reader with practiced ease. The machine made a harsh buzzing sound. Decline flashed across its tiny screen in red letters. Color rose in Charlotte's cheeks as Eli discreetly tried again. Same result. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out another card, then another. Each attempt ended with that same harsh buzz, that same red message. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "I assure you, there must be some mistake. The storm must be affecting the connection." "It happens sometimes," Eli said gently, already reaching for his own wallet behind the counter. "Why don't you—" "I'll come back," she cut him off, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine mortification. "I'm staying at the Ridge Hotel. I'll return with cash or when the connection is better." Before Eli could respond, she turned sharply, her silk scarf slipping from her neck in her haste. It fluttered to the floor like a surrendered flag, but she was already pushing through the door, the bell's cheerful ring a stark contrast to her rigid shoulders. Eli watched through the window as she climbed back into her Mercedes, her movements quick and precise. The engine roared to life, and she pulled away as the rain began to fall in earnest. Walking around the counter, he bent to pick up the abandoned scarf. The silk was cool and smooth in his calloused hands, the deep blue fabric probably worth more than his daily sales. With a small sigh, he hung it carefully on the coat rack by the counter, where it looked as out of place as its owner had. He pulled two 20s from his wallet and rang up the sale properly, dropping the change in the register. "Kindness always comes back around," he murmured, his wife's words echoing in his mind as thunder rolled overhead. The lunch rush at Turner's Groceries consisted of exactly 3 customers buying candy bars. Eli was reorganizing the dairy case when Jenny Martinez, his teenage cashier, called out from the front counter, "Mr. Turner, you've got to see this." Jenny waved her phone in the air, her dark ponytail bouncing with excitement. "It's gone totally viral." Eli wiped his hands on his apron and walked over. "What's viral?" "This video from yesterday. Someone recorded that fancy lady when her credit card got declined." Jenny held up her phone, its screen filled with a shaky recording. Eli's stomach dropped as he watched. The footage, clearly taken by someone pretending to shop nearby, showed Charlotte Vale at the counter. The camera caught her perfectly, the moment of shock when her card declined, the flash of embarrassment across her face, the way her shoulders stiffened. 3 million views already, Jenny said, scrolling through comments. People are going crazy over it. Look at all these nasty comments about her. The video's caption screamed in all caps, "Arrogant CEO humiliated in small town store." Below it, hundreds of comments piled up. "Karma. Rich people thinking they're above everyone else. Bet she's never been told no before." "This isn't right," Eli said quietly, stepping back from the counter. "Whoever filmed this, they had no business doing that." Jenny looked up, surprised. "But Mr. Turner, she was so rude to you. Don't you think she deserved it?" Eli shook his head. "Nobody deserves to have their worst moment shared with the world. Take it down if you shared it, Jenny, please." Meanwhile, 30 floors up in the gleaming headquarters of Vale Organic Foods, Charlotte Vale's morning was imploding. Her PR team had crammed into her corner office, laptops open, phones buzzing constantly. "It's everywhere," said Marcus, her head of communications, pacing between the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the traditional media is picking it up now too." Charlotte sat rigid behind her desk, her face a careful mask. The silk scarf she'd left behind at Turner's would have matched her gray blazer perfectly. "Numbers? Bad," said Sarah from Digital. "We're trending nationwide. The narrative is, well, it's not good. They're calling you everything from entitled to fraud. Your personal approval rating has dropped 18 points since this morning." "The board is concerned," Marcus added carefully. "They're suggesting we need to get ahead of this." "Spin it somehow," Charlotte's computer chimed with another email from the board. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. Her position had always been precarious. The young female CEO who'd climbed too high, too fast. The sharks had been circling for months, waiting for any sign of weakness. "What are our options?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension headache building behind her eyes. Marcus cleared his throat. "We could claim it was a technical error with the payment system, or perhaps frame it as a misunderstanding. Or," Sarah interrupted, "we lean into it, make you more relatable. The successful CEO who sometimes faces everyday problems just like everyone else." Charlotte held up her hand, silencing them both. On her screen, the video played again, but this time, she wasn't watching herself. She was watching Eli Turner. The quiet way he'd handled the situation. No mockery, no judgment. He'd even offered to let her come back later to pay. The memory of his kindness felt like a stone in her stomach now. "Clear the room," she said suddenly. "Everyone out. I need to think." Her team filed out, still clutching their phones and tablets. When the door clicked shut, Charlotte finally allowed her shoulders to slump. She clicked play on the video one more time. The comments scrolled past. "Bet she's never worked a real day in her life. Trust fund baby gets reality check. If they only knew." If they could see the little girl who'd grown up in a trailer park, who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through business school, who'd built this company from nothing but grit and determination. But none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the quiet dignity of that store owner, who'd shown her more grace than she probably deserved. "Maybe he really was kind," she whispered to the empty office. The words felt strange in her mouth. Vulnerability wasn't a language she spoke often. Charlotte reached for her phone, hesitated for just a moment, then dialed. "Sandra, get me the number for Turner's Groceries in Maplewood, and clear my schedule for tomorrow." She ended the call and stood, walking to the window. Below, the city stretched out in a maze of steel and glass, so different from the faded charm of that small-town store. Everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, was at risk now because of a viral video. But maybe, just maybe, that same video had shown her something she'd been missing all along. The afternoon sun beat down on Turner's Groceries as Eli methodically restocked the canned goods aisle. The familiar rhythm of placing each can, soup, beans, corn, helped calm his mind after the chaos of the viral video. The gentle clinking of metal against metal filled the quiet store. Chicken noodle goes here, creamed corn there, he muttered to himself, trying to maintain his normal routine. But his hands trembled slightly as he arranged the cans in neat rows. The past 2 days had brought a parade of curious onlookers, smartphones ready, hoping to catch another viral moment. The rumble of an engine outside broke his concentration. Through the front windows, he watched a sleek black SUV pull into the nearly empty parking lot. His heart skipped when Charlotte Vale stepped out, looking even more polished than before in a crisp navy suit. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 assistants in matching gray blazers flanked her, while a camera crew unpacked equipment from a second vehicle. The bell above the door chimed. Charlotte's heels clicked purposefully across the worn linoleum floor. Mr. Turner. Her smile was camera-ready. "I hope we're not interrupting." Eli set down his half-empty box of cans. "Miss Vale, I wasn't expecting. Please, call me Charlotte." She gestured to her entourage. "I hope you don't mind the cameras. I wanted to properly thank you for your kindness the other day." Before Eli could respond, the film crew had set up portable lights, bathing the modest store in an artificial glow. One of the assistants pressed a microphone into Charlotte's hand while the other fussed with her already perfect hair. "Ready when you are, miss." "Vale," called the cameraman. Charlotte's posture shifted subtly as the red recording light blinked on. Her smile widened a fraction. "I'm here at Turner's Groceries with owner Eli Turner, whose generosity touched me deeply during my visit earlier this week. Eli, your actions exemplify the very values Vale Organics strives to promote." Eli fought the urge to tug at his worn collar. The camera's lens felt like a spotlight on his shabby store. "That's why I'm here today with an exciting proposition." Charlotte turned to face him directly. "Vale Organics would like to partner with Turner's Groceries. We want to bring our premium organic product line to your shelves, making healthy choices accessible to your community." The words hit Eli like a physical force. A partnership with Vale Organics? His mind raced to the stack of unpaid bills in his office, to the dwindling inventory, to his late wife's dream of keeping the store alive. "It's a full marketing package," Charlotte continued smoothly. "New signage, store displays, promotional support. We believe this partnership could revitalize not just Turner's Groceries, but the entire neighborhood." The camera panned between them, capturing every moment. Eli's throat felt dry. That's quite an offer. "We value small businesses, Mr. Turner. Real people serving real communities." Charlotte's voice carried the perfect blend of sincerity and authority. "What do you say?" The lights felt hotter. Eli's mind whirled with possibilities. Fresh inventory, full shelves, maybe even enough profit to fix the temperamental refrigeration units. But something in Charlotte's too-perfect presentation gave him pause. "Could we discuss this privately?" he managed. "Of course." Charlotte handed her microphone to an assistant. "Take 5, everyone." She led Eli to the back office, closing the door on the bustling crew. In the familiar space, with its metal desk and family photos, Charlotte's demeanor softened slightly. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, her voice lower, more natural. "But I want you to know, this offer is genuine. What you did the other day." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "It reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the corporate world. Simple kindness matters." Eli studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. "My wife always said that kindness comes back around. But this seems too good to be true?" Charlotte's smile turned wry. "Sometimes good things really do happen, Mr. Turner. Your store has potential. Let us help you realize it." Through the office window, Eli could see the camera crew adjusting their equipment, ready to capture his answer. The weight of his wife's dream, of Lila's future, pressed on his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's do it." Charlotte's face lit up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. They returned to the main floor, where she announced their agreement to the waiting cameras. There were handshakes, more speeches about community values, and promises of paperwork to follow. Hours later, after the circus had packed up and driven away, Eli sat at his kitchen table. Lila pushed her peas around her plate, unusually quiet. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked. "Is the store going to change?" Her small face creased with worry. Mom loved it just the way it is. Eli reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Some changes might be good. Maybe things are finally turning around for us." Lila brightened. "You mean like Mom used to say, About being patient and having faith? That's right. Eli managed to smile, thinking of his wife's unwavering optimism. Your mom always believed things would work out if we just kept doing our best. Then Mom would be proud, Lila declared, finally taking a bite of her dinner. She'd want you to be happy. Eli nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He watched his daughter eat, her simple faith and goodness still intact. Outside, the setting sun painted the kitchen window golden, and for the first time in months, hope felt possible again. Morning light streamed through Turner's Grocery's freshly cleaned windows, casting warm rectangles across floors that hadn't seen this much foot traffic in years. The bell above the door chimed constantly as customers flowed in and out, their excited chatter filling the usually quiet space. Eli stood behind the counter, still trying to process the transformation that had happened overnight. Where empty shelves had gathered dust just yesterday, pristine rows of Vail Organics products now stood in perfect formation. Their elegant packaging caught the light, making the humble store look almost upscale. "Dad, look!" Lila called out, pressing her face against the front window. "More TV people!" Sure enough, another news van had pulled up outside, joining the small fleet already parked along Main Street. A reporter in a crisp blazer was touching up her makeup while her cameraman adjusted his equipment. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Peterson, who'd been shopping here since before Eli was born, held up a jar of Vail Organics honey. "This is the fancy stuff they sell in the city. I saw it on TV once, $30 a jar." She beamed. "But you've got it marked at 15. Eli nodded, remembering Charlotte's words from their meeting. Miss Vail wanted to make sure the prices worked for our community. The words still felt strange in his mouth, like a dream he might wake up from. Outside, more locals gathered to watch the news crews. Some waved through the windows or gave thumbs-up signs. Eli's chest tightened with emotion. He hadn't seen the town this energized since Sarah was alive. The morning rush brought a steady stream of curious customers, many buying Vail products just to be part of the excitement. By noon, Eli had done more business than he usually saw in a week. "Well, would you look at this?" A gruff voice made Eli turn. Bill Matthews, his landlord, stood there in his usual worn denim jacket, but his typically stern expression had softened. "Quite a turnaround, Turner." "Mr. Matthews, call me Bill." The older man clapped him on the shoulder. "Listen, about that late rent notice I sent last week, forget it. Take your time getting caught up. Looks like you'll be sticking around after all." At a small table near the window, Lila sat surrounded by colored markers and construction paper. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on her artwork. "Do you think Miss Vail likes purple?" she asked nobody in particular, holding up two similar shades. "I'm sure she'll love whatever you make, sweetie," Eli assured her, though his stomach nodded slightly at the mention of Charlotte. There was something about her he couldn't quite figure out, a shadow behind her polished smile. The afternoon brought a fresh wave of excitement when Charlotte's assistant arrived to check on the store. The young woman, Rebecca, tapped rapidly on her tablet as she walked the aisles. "Everything looks perfect," she reported into her phone. "Yes, miss." "Vail, the local response is exactly what we hoped for. The media coverage is overwhelmingly positive." Eli pretended to organize receipts, but he couldn't help overhearing as Rebecca continued her call near the bread display. "The PR redemption tour is working beautifully," she said in a lower voice. "Your approval ratings are already up 12 points since yesterday." Across town, in her temporary office at the Maplewood Inn, Charlotte ended the call and set down her phone. She stood and walked to the window, watching the small town go about its day. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. What, immaculate makeup, designer suit, not a hair out of place. The perfect image of corporate success. But something else looked back at her too, something in her eyes that made her turn away. She thought of Eli's genuine smile, of little Lila's innocent waves, of the way the townspeople had welcomed her company's products with such enthusiasm. The truth sat heavy in her chest. This wasn't just about redeeming her image anymore. These were real people, with real lives and hopes, and she was using them. Charlotte moved to her desk and picked up the preliminary partnership agreement. The words blurred before her eyes. Mutual benefit, community engagement, positive brand association. Corporate speak that masked the reality of what she'd done. She remembered Eli's face when she'd offered the deal, that mix of hope and hesitation. He'd trusted her, despite everything, and she'd let him believe this was all genuine, when really, maybe I am the villain, she whispered to her reflection in the darkening window. Back at the store, the day's excitement had finally wound down. The news vans had departed, and the steady stream of customers had slowed to a trickle. Eli stood in the quiet store, surrounded by new products and fresh hope, but something tugged at his heart. He walked to the back office, really just a storage closet with a desk, and closed the door. The familiar smell of cardboard boxes and old paperwork surrounded him. This had been Sarah's favorite spot to pray, especially when times were tough. Eli lowered his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I know I haven't talked to you much lately, but thank you for sending help when we needed it most." He paused, swallowing hard. I hope this is really your doing, and not just." He couldn't finish the thought. Instead, he stood in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the remnants of one day's miracle, while across town, Charlotte Vale stood alone with her guilt. The morning started like any other since Charlotte Vale's visit with Hope. Eli had just finished arranging a new display of Vale Organics premium pasta when his phone buzzed. 3 messages from different neighbors, all with the same link. His hands trembled as he clicked it. The security footage played in grainy black and white, but the audio was crystal clear. There was Charlotte, standing at his counter 3 days ago, her perfect posture, unmistakable even in the fuzzy video. "Remember the plan," a man's voice said off camera. "Make it look natural." Charlotte's recorded voice replied, "This is ridiculous. A declined card? Really? The board wants softer PR. Just do it, Charlotte." Eli's stomach lurched. He watched himself on screen, offering her coffee, being kind, all while she played him for a fool. The footage jumped to after she'd left, showing the same man returning to collect the camera's memory card. They'd planned it all. The blogger's words beneath the video stung worse than the footage itself. Exposed. Vale Organics CEO stages small-town PR stunt. Local store owner. Willing participant or innocent victim. The bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been shopping here for 20 years, walked in with her tablet clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide with disappointment. "Eli Turner, tell me you didn't know," she said, her voice quavering. "Tell me you weren't part of this circus." "Mrs. Henderson, I swear I had no idea." The words felt thick in his throat. "I thought, my daughter showed me the video." She set her shopping basket down, empty. "I defended you in the comments, said you'd never participate in something so manipulative." Her lips trembled. "I've known you since you married Sarah." She would be, "Don't." Eli's voice cracked. "Please don't bring her into this." More customers trickled in, each carrying phones or tablets, each wearing the same betrayed expression. Some didn't speak at all, just shook their heads and left. Others demanded explanations Eli couldn't give. By noon, the store was empty again. The new Vale Organics products sat untouched, their fancy labels now seeming to mock him. Lila's thank you card to Charlotte still hung by the register, its cheerful colors a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Local news wanted statements. Online commenters tagged him in theories and accusations. Even his suppliers called, questioning whether they wanted their products associated with what people were calling number grocery gate. Around 2 o'clock, a young mother he'd helped last week with a free gallon of milk walked in. She avoided his eyes, grabbed a loaf of bread, and placed exact change on the counter without a word. The distance in her eyes hurt worse than any angry comment could. "Jamie," he called as she turned to leave. "I didn't know. I would never. Save it." She cut him off. "You know what's worse than being poor, Eli? Being used to make someone else look good for helping the poor." The door slammed behind her. Eli's phone buzzed again. Charlotte's name lit up the screen. He almost ignored it, but something, maybe Sarah's voice in his head about giving people chances to explain, made him answer. "Charlotte." His voice was steady, calmer than he felt. "Eli, I can explain." Her usual polish had cracked. She sounded breathless, desperate. "The board they pushed this plan through without really consulting me. I should have said no. I know that now. But was any of it real?" The question came out barely above a whisper. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. Finally, Charlotte's voice came back, small and defeated. "It wasn't supposed to go this way." Eli closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's words about kindness coming back around. She'd been wrong. Sometimes kindness just left you exposed, vulnerable, foolish. The phone slipped from his fingers, ending the call. Through the store's windows, he could see more news vans pulling up. In the back room, he heard Lila humming as she did her homework, blissfully unaware that her father's world was crumbling. Again, the security camera in the corner blinked its red light steadily, recording his pain for anyone else who might want to use it against him. With heavy steps, he walked over and unplugged it, plunging that corner of the store into darkness. The local evening news played through the radio, their words sharp and cutting. In a shocking revelation, the heartwarming story of small-town kindness that captured national attention has been exposed as an elaborate publicity stunt. Eli reached over and turned it off. The silence that followed felt like a mercy. The rain drummed against the windows of Turner's Groceries with relentless persistence, each droplet creating a steady rhythm that seemed to match the heavy, broken cadence of Eli's heart. With each piece of weathered plywood he carefully positioned and nailed over the storefront windows, the hollow thud of his hammer echoed through the cavernous emptiness of what had once been a bustling neighborhood store. The hand-painted close sign, one that Lila had decorated with cheerful sunflowers just weeks ago, now swung sadly in the bitter wind, its bright colors dulled by the gray afternoon light. The storm outside seemed fitting somehow, as if nature itself was mourning the death of his dreams. Eli's calloused hands gripped the hammer tighter than necessary, each strike against the nail heads releasing a fraction of the frustration and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm him. The store that his late wife Sarah had envisioned, the place where she dreamed of serving their community with love and dignity, was being boarded up like a tomb. Inside the store, past the empty shelves that once held hope along with groceries, Lila sat perched on the familiar checkout counter stool. Her small legs dangled freely in the air, swinging back and forth in a nervous rhythm as she watched her father work through the rain-streaked glass. Her usually bright, inquisitive eyes, so much like her mother's, were now clouded with the kind of confusion that only comes when a child's safe world suddenly stops making sense. "Daddy, why are people so mad at us?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. She clutched her worn stuffed rabbit, Mr. Patches, closer to her chest. The store windows didn't do anything wrong. They're just windows. Eli paused mid-swing, his hammer suspended in the air, as if frozen by the innocent weight of her question. How could he possibly explain this nightmare to an 8-year-old when he could barely wrap his own mind around how everything had gone so terribly wrong? The viral security footage had transformed their small-town dream into a national spectacle overnight, turning what should have been a simple act of kindness into something twisted and ugly. His broad shoulders slumped forward as he drove, another nail into place, each strike feeling like another nail in the coffin of everything he'd tried to build. "Sometimes, sweetheart," he said carefully, working hard to keep his voice steady and reassuring for her sake, "people get angry when they feel like they've been tricked or lied to, even when that wasn't what anybody meant to happen." Lila shifted on her stool, hugging Mr. Patches even tighter against her small frame. The rabbit's fur was matted from years of love and countless bedtime stories. "But what about Miss Charlotte? Is she still our friend?" Her voice carried that particular quality of childhood hope that could break a parent's heart with its pure trust in the goodness of people. The hammer slipped in Eli's suddenly unsteady grip, the metal head nearly catching his thumb as it glanced off the nail. He stared through the half-boarded window at the rain streaming down the exposed glass like tears from heaven itself. The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unanswered, because he honestly didn't know what Charlotte Vale was to them anymore. Friend, enemy, or just another person who'd proven that his faith in human decency was nothing more than foolish naivety? Across the city, separated by miles of highway and what felt like an entire universe of privilege, Charlotte Vale sat rigid as a statue in her ergonomic leather chair. The executive conference room of Vale Organics headquarters buzzed with the frantic energy of her PR team, who moved around the polished mahogany table like angry wasps protecting their hive. The room's wall-to-wall screens displayed an endless scroll of social media feeds, each one screaming variations of the same devastating headlines. Vale Organics CEO caught in small-town scandal, corporate ice queen's fake charity stunt exposed. Heartless CEO destroys family business for PR points. Her usually perfect composure was beginning to crack around the edges. Her hands, normally steady and controlled during even the most high-stakes negotiations, trembled slightly as she watched her reputation crumble in real time across dozens of screens. "Miss Vale, we absolutely must get ahead of this story before it spirals any further out of control," Marcus, her head of PR, insisted with barely contained panic. His normally immaculate tie hung askew, betraying the hours he'd spent in crisis management mode. Dark circles under his eyes spoke to sleepless nights spent crafting damage control strategies. "The board has been calling non-stop. We've drafted a comprehensive statement that should help contain the fallout." Charlotte's manicured fingers felt foreign and clumsy as she picked up the crisp white paper he'd slid across the polished table. Surface. Her face drained of color as she read the carefully crafted words, each sentence designed to protect her at Eli's expense. "You want me to publicly claim that Eli Turner orchestrated this entire situation?" Her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. "That he somehow manipulated everything for his own publicity gain? It's the cleanest possible solution under the circumstances." Patricia Whitmore, one of the most powerful board members, cut in via the wall-mounted video conference screen. Her pixelated face showed all the warmth of a winter morning. Her expression as cold and calculating as her reputation suggested. "Either you distance yourself completely from this mess, or the board will be forced to seriously reevaluate your position with this company. I trust I'm making myself clear." Charlotte stood abruptly, her leather chair rolling backward and hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows with a soft thud. "He's a single father trying desperately to keep his deceased wife's store alive. I can't destroy an innocent man just to save my own career." "Then you'll destroy yourself for absolutely nothing." Patricia replied with surgical coldness. "You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to make your final decision. Don't let misplaced sentiment cloud your business judgment, Charlotte. You've worked too hard to throw it all away for strangers." The meeting dispersed like smoke, leaving Charlotte completely alone in the vast conference room that suddenly felt more like a prison than a symbol of her success. She walked slowly to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her forehead against the cool glass and feeling the vibration of the city's pulse 20 stories below. The urban sprawl stretched endlessly in all directions, millions of people living their lives completely oblivious to the battle raging in her heart. Her phone buzzed insistently against the silence, another message from Eli's number. "Why?" was all it said, just like the dozens of others she'd received since the security footage had leaked to the media. Each message was a knife twisting deeper into her heart, a reminder of the trust she'd shattered and the good man she'd inadvertently betrayed. Later that evening, in the sterile perfection of her penthouse apartment, Charlotte paced across the pristine white carpet like a caged animal. Her designer heels lay abandoned by the door, and her usually immaculate appearance had given way to something more human and vulnerable. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like earthbound stars, but she barely noticed their beauty. Her laptop sat open on the glass dining table, its screen displaying a blank document that seemed to mock her inability to find the right words. "Dear Board of Directors," she began typing with trembling fingers, "I hereby tender my resignation from my position as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." Her hands froze over the keyboard as if paralyzed by the weight of what she was about to sacrifice. Unbidden images flashed through her mind like a movie reel of her recent transformation. Eli's quiet, selfless kindness that stormy evening when he'd covered her bill without question or expectation. Lila's innocent, gap-toothed smile as she'd helped stock shelves, chattering about her hopes and dreams. The hand-drawn thank you card covered in crayon hearts that still sat on Charlotte's nightstand, the first genuine gift she'd received in years. The way the entire store had seemed to come alive with hope and community spirit, however briefly, before everything fell apart. She thought of her own childhood, those endless, empty apartments where she'd waited alone for parents who were always too busy building their careers to notice their daughter's hunger for love and attention. They'd taught her through their neglect that professional success was the only measure of human worth, that vulnerability was weakness, and that emotions were liabilities to be managed rather than treasures to be cherished. She'd built her entire empire on those bitter lessons, but now the foundation felt as hollow and fragile as her childhood dreams had been. Charlotte deleted the resignation letter with a sharp keystroke, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll find another way to fix this," she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. She opened her laptop's browser with renewed purpose, quickly booking a ticket to Maplewood for the next morning, a one-way ticket that felt like both an escape route and a leap of faith. Rain continued to fall outside her windows, the droplets matching the tears that finally broke free from her carefully maintained composure after years of emotional drought. She walked slowly to her walk-in closet, past the rows of designer suits and expensive dresses that had been her armor in the corporate world. In the very back, hanging forgotten like a relic from another life, was a simple cream-colored cardigan she'd impulsively bought during her first visit to Maplewood. It still carried the faint, comforting scent of Eli's store coffee and cinnamon, old wood, and something indefinably real that money couldn't buy. Sitting on the edge of her king-size bed, Charlotte held the cardigan close to her chest and breathed in its familiar warmth. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the full, crushing weight of all the choices that had led her to this moment of reckoning. The woman who'd first walked into Turner's Groceries that stormy night, cold, calculating, and emotionally bankrupt, would never have understood what she was now prepared to risk everything for. But that woman was gone. Transformed by simple acts of kindness she'd never expected to find in a supposedly dying small town. Her phone lit up one final time with a message from the board of directors. Press conference scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Official statement attached for your approval. Your presence is non-negotiable. Don't disappoint us, Charlotte. Charlotte looked at her ticket to Maplewood, the departure time clearly marked 8 a.m. There would be no going back from this choice, no safety net to catch her if she fell. But for the first time in her adult life, the thought of falling didn't terrify her. Sometimes, she realized, you had to lose everything to discover what was truly worth keeping. The morning fog crept through Maplewood like a thick blanket, wrapping the streets in gray silence. Charlotte Vale's rental car, a modest sedan this time, not her usual luxury vehicle, rolled quietly into the nearly empty parking lot of Turner's Groceries. The plywood-covered windows made the store look abandoned, a far cry from its brief moment of glory just days ago. She sat in her car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. Gone were her designer suits and perfect makeup. Today she wore jeans, a simple sweater, and minimal makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the damp morning air. The bell above the door chimed weakly as she entered. Inside, Eli was restocking a sparse shelf with the few remaining items he had left. He stiffened at the sound but didn't turn around. "We're closed," he said flatly. "I know." Charlotte's voice was quiet, missing its usual sharp edge. "I came to help." Now Eli did turn, his face a mask of careful neutrality. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "Help? Like the last time you helped?" Charlotte flinched but held her ground. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." She took a step forward, then stopped when she saw him tense. "I'm not here with cameras or deals or PR stunts. Just me. Charlotte, not CEO Vale, just me." Eli placed a can of beans on the shelf with deliberate care. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "You shouldn't," she admitted. "I wouldn't. But I'd like to earn back your trust. Let me volunteer here. No publicity, no announcements, just work, real work. Stocking shelves, mopping floors, whatever you need." A bitter laugh escaped him. "You? Mopping floors?" "Yes." She rolled up her sleeves. "I grew up poor, Eli. Despite what people think, I wasn't born in a boardroom. I worked as a grocery clerk through college. I know which end of a mop to hold." The silence stretched between them. Through the store's grimy windows, the fog outside seemed to press in, making the world feel smaller, more intimate. Finally, Eli spoke. 2 hours. That's all you get today. First sign of cameras or reporters, you're out." Charlotte nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you. Where do you want me to start?" "Storage room needs organizing. It's a mess back there." For the next 2 hours, Charlotte worked without complaint. She sorted boxes, wiped down shelves, and organized inventory. Her designer watch was carefully tucked away, her manicured hands growing dirty with honest work. The next day, she came back. And the next. Each day, Eli allowed her to stay a little longer. She learned the names of the few loyal customers who still came in. Mrs. Peterson with her arthritis, Mr. Wong who bought milk for the neighborhood cats, teenage Tommy who came in for his diabetic grandmother's supplies. By the end of the week, she was working full days. She noticed how Eli always slipped extra items into Tommy's bag without charging him, how he kept Mrs. Peterson's favorite brand of tea, even though it barely sold. The small acts of kindness she had once dismissed as small-town sentiment now revealed themselves as the threads that held a community together. The locals were wary at first, shooting her suspicious glances, but slowly, as they saw her day after day, working alongside Eli without fanfare, their attitudes began to shift. Mrs. Peterson even brought her a homemade sandwich one afternoon, saying she looked too thin. On a quiet Tuesday morning, while Charlotte was arranging a display of canned goods, small footsteps approached behind her. She turned to find Lila standing there, clutching something in her hands. "I made this for you," Lila said, holding out a slightly crumpled piece of construction paper. "Well, I made it before, when you first came, but then everything got sad." She paused, looking down at her shoes. Daddy says sometimes people make mistakes, but what matters is if they try to fix them. Are you trying to fix your mistake? Charlotte carefully took the card. It was decorated with glitter and stickers, with "Thank you, Miss Charlotte," written in wobbly child's handwriting. Inside, Lila had drawn a picture of the store, with 3 stick figures standing in front. One tall, with a tie, clearly meant to be Charlotte. One with a smile, Eli, and a small one with pigtails, Lila. Something broke inside Charlotte. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She quickly wiped them away, but Lila had already seen. "Don't cry," Lila said, reaching up to pat Charlotte's arm. "Daddy says crying just means your heart is too full of feelings." Charlotte knelt down to Lila's level, holding the card like it was made of gold. "Your daddy is very wise," she managed to say through her tears. "Thank you, Lila. This is the most beautiful card I've ever received." From behind the counter, Eli watched the exchange, his expression softening just slightly. For the first time since the scandal broke, he allowed himself to wonder if perhaps second chances were possible after all. A week had passed since Charlotte's return to Turner's Groceries. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as she helped Eli set up folding tables outside the store. Hand-drawn signs reading "Community Food Drive" fluttered in the gentle breeze. "Are you sure anyone will come?" Charlotte arranged empty boxes labeled "Donations" on the tables. Her sleeves were rolled up, and a light sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead. In Maplewood, folks show up for each other. Eli's voice carried a quiet certainty as he unfolded another chair, even if they don't have much themselves. As if on cue, an elderly woman approached, clutching 2 cans of soup. "Morning, Eli." She smiled warmly, then hesitated when she saw Charlotte. "Oh, you're that lady from TV." Charlotte's cheeks flushed, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, Mrs. Anderson, Margaret Anderson." The woman placed her cans in the donation box. "I don't have much, but every little bit helps, right?" "That's very kind of you," Charlotte said softly, touched by the simple gesture. Throughout the morning, more people trickled in. A construction worker dropped off pasta on his way to work. A young mother with 3 kids contributed a bag of rice. Each person had a story, a connection to the store and to Eli. During a quiet moment, Charlotte watched Eli chat with a teenage boy who'd brought some canned vegetables. The boy's jacket was worn thin, but he'd given what he could. She noticed how Eli listened intently, treating the boy's contribution with the same respect he'd show a millionaire's donation. Around noon, they took a break for lunch. Eli pulled out 2 brown paper bags from behind the counter. "Hope you like peanut butter and jelly," he said, handing one to Charlotte. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her lunch. "You didn't have to," Lila insisted. His lips twitched in a small smile. She made them herself. They sat on milk crates behind the store, eating their sandwiches in comfortable silence. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of approaching autumn. "Tell me about your wife," Charlotte said suddenly, then immediately regretted it when she saw pain flash across Eli's face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No, it's okay." He took a deep breath. Sarah. She loved this place. Not just the store, but the whole town. She knew everyone's names, their kids' names, their stories. The store was her dream of creating a place where everyone felt welcome. Charlotte looked down at her half-eaten sandwich. "She sounds wonderful." She was. His voice grew distant. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by her memory." "You are," Charlotte said firmly. "I've seen how you treat people, how you listen. That's what matters." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, but she could still see the guard in his eyes. The trust she'd broken wasn't easily mended. The afternoon brought more donations. Charlotte found herself drawn into conversations with locals, learning about their lives. Mrs. Peterson, whose grandson was starting college. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd lost his job but still brought a can of beans to help others. They worked side by side, sorting donations, sharing brief moments of laughter over small things. A misprinted label, a story about Lila's latest adventure. Yet beneath the easy rhythm of their teamwork, Charlotte felt the weight of unspoken words. When she handed Eli a box, their fingers brushed accidentally. He pulled back slightly, almost imperceptibly, but she noticed. The wall between them remained, invisible but solid. As the day wound down, Charlotte stepped out, into the parking lot. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a warm glow over the modest collection of donated food they'd gathered. She leaned against her car, watching the colors deepen. A strange feeling settled over her, a calmness she hadn't experienced since she was a little girl playing in her grandmother's garden. Before ambition and success became her only measures of worth, the peace felt foreign, yet somehow right. Here, among dented cans and simple kindness, she'd found something her penthouse, apartment, and corner office had never given her. She just wasn't sure Eli would ever fully trust her enough to let her keep it. The Monday morning sun streamed through Turner's Groceries windows, casting warm squares of light across the worn linoleum floor. Charlotte stood behind the counter, organizing receipts, while Eli helped an elderly customer find her favorite brand of tea. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a call from an all-too-familiar number, Vale Organics Legal Department. Charlotte's stomach tightened. She glanced at Eli, who was now cheerfully chatting with the customer about her grandchildren, before slipping into the store's small break room. "Charlotte Vale speaking," she answered, her voice professional but wary. "Miss Vale," the clipped tone of Theodore Barnes, head legal counsel, cut through the line. "Your unauthorized absence has become a serious concern. The board met this morning." Charlotte's fingers gripped the phone tighter. "I submitted my request for personal leave, which was denied," Theodore interrupted. "You abandoned your post during a PR crisis. The board has reached a decision." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Charlotte sank into a folding chair. "What decision?" "You have 72 hours. Return to headquarters, issue a public statement condemning Eli Turner's exploitation of the situation, and resume your duties, or face immediate termination." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Exploitation? He had nothing to do with. The narrative has already been prepared. Mr. Turner used your moment of vulnerability for publicity. That's the story we're running with. Theodore's voice hardened. 3 days, Miss Vale, your choice. The line went dead. Charlotte stared at her phone, her reflection in its dark screen, looking pale and lost. "Everything okay?" Eli's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Charlotte forced a smile. "Just some loose ends at the company. Nothing important." The lie felt like acid on her tongue. Eli nodded slowly, clearly not entirely convinced. "Well, I could use your help with something, if you're free. Thought we might tackle cleaning up the storage room today." "Of course," Charlotte said quickly, grateful for the distraction. They spent the next few hours sorting through boxes and wiping down shelves. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Charlotte found herself studying Eli when he wasn't looking. The careful way he handled each item, the quiet strength in his movements, the occasional small smile when he found something that triggered a memory. "Sarah loved organizing this room," he said softly, running his hand along a shelf. "She had a system for everything." Charlotte paused, dustcloth in hand. It was rare for Eli to mention his late wife. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Eli picked up a small photo that had fallen behind some boxes, him and Sarah on their wedding day. "She always said this store wasn't just about selling groceries, it was about being there for people." The weight of Theodore's ultimatum pressed harder on Charlotte's chest. She turned away, pretending to organize a box of price tags, trying to hide the shame burning in her eyes. They worked through lunch, sharing a quiet meal of sandwiches Lila had helped make that morning. Charlotte noticed how Eli seemed to sense her distraction, but didn't push for answers. His gentle consideration only made her feel worse. As afternoon faded into evening, they transformed the storage room. Everything was clean, organized, labeled. It felt like a metaphor Charlotte couldn't quite grasp, putting things in order while her own life teetered on the edge of chaos. "Thank you," Eli said as they surveyed their work. "This means a lot." Charlotte managed a weak smile. "It's the least I can do." Later that night, in her modest hotel room, Charlotte sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop. The cursor blinked accusingly in the empty email field. The recipient line read, "Maxwell Crawford, CEO, Vale Organics." She'd started and deleted the email a dozen times. Each attempt felt inadequate, impossible. How could she explain that the person who'd walked into Turner's Groceries weeks ago wasn't the same person sitting here now? That somewhere between the staged card decline and today's storage room cleaning, something fundamental had shifted inside her? The ultimatums, deadline loomed. 72 hours to choose between her career, the identity she'd spent decades building, and her integrity. Between the power she'd always craved and the peace she'd finally found. Charlotte stared at her phone, sitting ominously silent beside her laptop. The blank email waited for her decision, cursor still blinking, like a heartbeat, counting down her remaining time. Dawn painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold as Charlotte's car wound through the familiar city streets toward Vale Organics headquarters. The massive glass tower stretched 30 stories into the morning sky, its reflective surface catching the sunrise and gleaming like a cold beacon against the concrete and steel urban landscape. Her hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles had turned bone white with tension, and she could feel her pulse hammering against her wrist. The underground parking garage felt colder than she remembered, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. Her designer heels clicked against the smooth concrete floor in a steady rhythm as she made her way to the elevator bank, each step echoing with purpose through the empty space. The security guard at the front desk nodded in recognition. Was it really only 3 weeks ago that she'd walked these polished marble halls every single day? Confident and untouchable, believing herself to be the queen of her own carefully constructed kingdom? The executive boardroom stood empty when she arrived 15 minutes early, its long mahogany table polished to such a mirror shine that she could see her own reflection staring back at her. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city sprawling below, a reminder of the power and influence that had once felt so important. Charlotte straightened her navy blazer and smoothed her hair as she watched the leather chairs fill one by one with familiar faces that now seemed like strangers from another lifetime. CEO Richard Morton entered last, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expression as unreadable as carved stone. "Miss Vale," he said in his measured baritone voice, gesturing with practiced authority to the lone chair positioned at the far end of the table, like a defendant's dock. "I trust you understand exactly why we've called this emergency meeting." Charlotte nodded slowly, her throat feeling tight and dry. She could taste the bitter edge of coffee and fear on her tongue. "I do, and I'd like the opportunity to explain. The damage to our brand has been quite significant," interrupted Sandra Peters, the sharp-featured head of public relations, whose ice-blue eyes had never shown warmth in all the years Charlotte had known her. She slid several manila folders across the polished surface, their contents spreading like accusations. "Social media engagement is down 40% across all platforms. 3 major retailers have postponed their contract renewals indefinitely. The hashtag number Veil Hypocrisy is trending in 12 major markets." "Because they don't understand the complete truth," Charlotte said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. She could feel sweat gathering at the base of her neck beneath her carefully styled hair. What happened at Turner's Groceries wasn't what it appeared to be, was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. Morton cut in sharply, his words falling like hammer blows. "One that requires immediate and decisive damage control if we're going to salvage what's left of our reputation." Charlotte took a deep breath that seemed to fill her lungs with courage she didn't know she possessed. She stood slowly, placing both hands flat on the cool surface of the table and meeting each pair of eyes around the room. "The truth is, I went along with your staged card decline because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my position, afraid of appearing weak in front of the board, afraid of admitting that I'd lost touch with the very values our company was supposedly built on." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But what I found in Maplewood was something real and precious. Eli Turner showed me genuine kindness when he thought no one was watching, when there was no camera rolling and no profit to be made. He represents everything our company claims to stand for in our mission statements and marketing campaigns. Community connection, integrity, trust." "How very touching," Morton said with dry sarcasm that could have cut glass. "But sentiment doesn't pay shareholders dividends or cover quarterly losses. We need you to hold a press conference this afternoon denouncing Turner's involvement in this entire debacle. You'll suggest that he orchestrated the viral moment purely for publicity and personal gain. Our legal team has already prepared a comprehensive statement that should satisfy the media." Charlotte felt something crack deep inside her chest. Not her resolve, but the last rusted chains of fear and obligation that had held her bound to this place for so many years. The sensation was both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "No." "I beg your pardon?" Morton's eyebrows rose with incredulous surprise. "I said no." Her voice grew stronger, ringing with newfound conviction that seemed to surprise even her. "I will not destroy a good man's reputation to save face for this company. Eli Turner is everything I spent years pretending to be. Honest, compassionate, genuine in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He's struggling every single day to keep his late wife's dream alive while raising their 8-year-old daughter alone on barely enough income to cover the bills. And instead of helping him, instead of supporting the kind of person we claim to celebrate, we're trying to crush him under our corporate machinery just to protect our stock prices and quarterly reports." Sandra Peters adjusted, her wire-rimmed glasses with the precision of a surgeon, her voice crisp and professional. "This isn't about morality, Charlotte. This is pure business strategy. You have exactly one choice to make here. You'll either save your job and your future with this company, or you'll protect that man's reputation. Choose very wisely." Charlotte reached into her leather briefcase with hands that had stopped trembling entirely. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope that she'd sealed that morning in her apartment, and without a moment's hesitation, she placed it on the table and slid it slowly toward Morton. The sound of paper against wood seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "I choose him." The room fell as quiet as a tomb as Morton opened the envelope with deliberate care and scanned the contents of her resignation letter. His jaw tightened visibly, a muscle jumping beneath his carefully shaved skin. "You're throwing away 15 years of dedicated work, a 7-figure salary, and a corner office view of the entire city. For what? A small-town grocery store owner in the middle of nowhere? Midwest?" "No," Charlotte replied firmly, gathering her briefings and personal items with movements that felt lighter than air. "I'm choosing to become someone I can finally respect when I look in the mirror each morning. I'm choosing to be the person that little girl in Maplewood thinks I already am." She turned to leave, then paused at the door, her hand resting on the polished brass handle. "You know what the truly funny thing is? That store probably makes less in an entire month than this company spends on imported coffee for the executive floor. But it has something we lost somewhere along the way in all our pursuit of profits and market dominance. It has a soul." The elevator ride down 30 floors felt lighter and more freeing than the journey up had that morning. As Charlotte stepped out of the towering glass building for the last time, the warm morning sun kissed her face like a benediction. A small, genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she whispered to herself, "Maybe I finally did something truly good." The weight of her corporate security badge no longer pressed against her hip, and her business cards had been left behind on the mahogany table, but somehow her heart felt fuller and more complete than it had in years. She had chosen truth over power, kindness over success, integrity over security, and somehow, walking away from everything she'd built, she had never felt more genuinely successful in her entire life. The afternoon sun streamed through Turner's Grocery's tall front windows, casting long golden rectangles across the scuffed linoleum floor and half-empty shelves. The light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal glow throughout the small store. Eli sat behind the worn wooden counter, his weathered hands wrapped around his phone as it buzzed incessantly with notifications. Each ping made his stomach tighten with dread. The local news website's headline blazed across his screen in bold letters. "Charlotte Vale resigns, refuses to blame small business owner." Below it, a smaller subheading read, "Former CEO walks away from $1 million position to protect local grocer." His fingers trembled slightly as he read the article, his eyes scanning each word with growing disbelief. Charlotte had walked away from everything, her corner office on the 32nd floor, her position as one of the youngest female CEOs in the industry, her 7-figure salary, the company car, the expense accounts, all of it. She'd sacrificed her entire professional life rather than tarnish his name or destroy what little reputation his struggling store had left. The words blurred before his eyes as he scrolled through the story, reading quotes from company insiders who described her final board meeting as emotional and unprecedented. "Dad?" Lila's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts like a gentle hand on his shoulder. She stood beside him, her small frame barely reaching the height of the counter, peering at his phone screen with curious brown eyes. Her school backpack still hung from one shoulder, and her hair was slightly mussed from the autumn wind. "Is that about Miss Charlotte?" "Yeah, sweetheart." He set the phone down with care and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. She did something really brave, something that probably cost her everything. Lila's brow furrowed in that way it did when she was trying to understand the complicated world of adults. But brave things are good things, right? Sometimes brave things hurt. Eli said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to keep from his daughter, even when they're the right thing to do. The brass bell above the door chimed its familiar welcome song. Mrs. Peterson, who hadn't crossed the threshold of Turner's Groceries in nearly 3 weeks, stepped inside with her usual faded canvas shopping bag clutched in arthritic hands. Her silver hair was perfectly curled as always, but her eyes were soft with genuine sympathy as she approached the counter. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her sensible shoes. "Eli," she said, reaching across the counter to pat his hand with fingers that felt like delicate paper. I just heard about Charlotte Vale on the radio. That poor woman giving up everything like that just to protect you and this store. Maybe we all judged her too harshly from the start." Eli managed a small smile, though it felt fragile on his face. "Maybe we did, Mrs. Peterson. Maybe we all did." Throughout the afternoon, more familiar faces began to appear like flowers blooming after a long winter. Mr. Rodriguez shuffled in for his weekly bread and eggs, his worn work boots leaving small prints on the floor. The Henderson twins burst through the door after school, their laughter filling the quiet spaces as they headed straight for their usual after-school snacks, chocolate chip cookies from the bakery section and cold milk from the dairy case. Each customer offered a kind word, a gentle smile, or a quiet apology for staying away during the worst of the media storm. "We're still here for you, Eli," said Sarah from the diner down the street, her arms full of groceries more than her usual modest order. Her purchase would help, even if just a little. This town sticks together when it matters. We should have remembered that sooner. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when the door chimed again around 4 o'clock. Charlotte stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the golden autumn light streaming in behind her. She looked completely different than Eli had ever seen her, transformed in a way that went far deeper than mere appearance. Gone were the tailored designer suits with their sharp lines and expensive fabrics. Gone was the perfectly applied makeup that had always made her look like she'd stepped from a magazine cover. Instead, she wore simple dark jeans and a soft cream sweater that looked like it might have come from any department store. Her hair, usually styled in an elegant chignon, was pulled back in a casual ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that seemed more genuine than any boardroom confidence she'd ever displayed. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The few customers scattered throughout the store fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they turned to watch the interaction unfold. Even the refrigerated cases seemed to hum more quietly. Eli stepped out from behind the counter, his movements uncertain and careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I saw the news," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Charlotte shrugged, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It wasn't much of a choice, really. I couldn't let them hurt you anymore, not after everything I'd already done to damage your life and this place." "But your career?" Eli started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her sacrifice. Was built on quarterly profit margins and carefully crafted public image. She finished for him, her voice growing stronger. She looked around the store with new eyes, taking in the worn linoleum floors that had seen decades of loyal customers, the handwritten price tags that spoke of personal attention, the community bulletin board covered with local announcements and thank you notes. "This place, it's built on something real, something I'd forgotten existed. Kindness, community, people who actually care about each other." Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "I forgot what that felt like." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her movements deliberate despite her age. She reached out and touched Charlotte's arm with the same gentle kindness she'd shown Eli moments earlier. "We have a saying here in Maplewood, dear. There's always room at the table for one more, and there's always a chance to start over." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, threatening to spill over as the words hit her like a warm embrace. But before she could respond, Lila darted across the store with the fearless energy that only children possess. She wrapped her thin arms around Charlotte's waist and looked up with her mother's earnest brown eyes, eyes that had inherited Sarah's gift for seeing straight to the heart of things. "You're not scary anymore," Lila declared, with the kind of simple honesty that only children can deliver without causing offense. Charlotte's laugh came out watery and broken as tears finally spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks on skin that had rarely shown such raw emotion. She knelt down to Lila's level and hugged her back, her perfectly maintained facade finally crumbling completely, piece by piece, until only the real woman remained. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and something that might have been relief. "I guess I'm not scary anymore." 2 days after Charlotte's resignation hit the news, the morning light filtered through Turner's Groceries windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. Eli stood at the counter, surrounded by papers and a laptop, something he rarely used. Charlotte sat beside him, her suit jacket draped over a nearby chair, sleeves rolled up as she scribbled notes. "What if we started small?" she suggested, tapping her pen against the notepad. "Focus on 10 families first, then expand as we get more support?" Eli nodded, studying the budget spreadsheet she'd created. 10 families we can definitely handle. I know at least that many who could use the help right now. Faith feeds. Charlotte said the name slowly, testing it out. It's perfect, simple, but meaningful. She glanced at him. Are you sure you want to use that name? After everything. Because of everything, Eli corrected gently. Sometimes faith shows up in unexpected ways. They spent the morning working out the details. Charlotte's business expertise merged seamlessly with Eli's knowledge of the community. She handled the numbers while he listed local contacts who might help farmers, other shop owners, the church group. By noon, people started trickling in, curious about the handwritten sign in the window. Community meeting, Faith Feeds Initiative, all welcome, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery brought coffee and day-old pastries. Tom Wheeler, who owned the hardware store, arrived with folding chairs. The idea is simple, Charlotte explained to the growing crowd, her corporate polish softened by genuine warmth. We create food packages for families in need. Everything's anonymous, both for recipients and donors. Eli watched her from near the produce section, struck by the transformation. Gone was the sharp-edged CEO who'd first walked into his store. Charlotte spoke with her hands, smiled easily, and listened intently to every suggestion. I can donate extra eggs. Sarah from the local farm called out. We always have more than we can sell. The church ladies can help pack boxes, Mrs. Peterson added. The energy in the room built steadily. People who'd been skeptical of Charlotte days ago now crowded around her, offering help. Eli moved between groups, connecting neighbors, making lists. Each time he caught Charlotte's eye across the room, they shared a look of growing amazement. During a quiet moment, she joined him near the register. I never knew community could feel like this, she admitted softly. In my world, everything was transactions and bottom lines. That's the thing about small towns, Eli replied. We're all we've got, so we look out for each other. They worked through the afternoon, setting up a system. Charlotte created a simple database on Eli's laptop while he organized storage space in the back room. Lila, home from school, helped design a logo, a simple heart made of wheat stalks. Can I help pack boxes? She asked, coloring carefully within the lines of her drawing. Of course you can, sweetheart. Charlotte answered before Eli could. She caught herself and glanced at him apologetically, but he just smiled and nodded. By evening, they had their first delivery scheduled for the following week. The store hummed with purpose as volunteers arranged shelves and sorted donations. Someone had brought in a radio and soft music mixed with cheerful conversation. This is really happening, Charlotte marveled, watching the scene from behind the counter. Her usual perfect posture had relaxed, and there was flour on her silk blouse from helping unload bakery donations. Thanks to you, Eli said quietly. She shook her head. No, thanks to everyone. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I finally learned what actually matters. The community gathering wound down naturally as sunset approached. People left in twos and threes, carrying assignment sheets and sign-up forms. The store felt different, somehow more alive than it had in months. Charlotte stood by the window, watching the golden light fade over Main Street. Eli moved around the store, straightening chairs and collecting coffee cups. When he looked up, he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something warm and uncertain all at once. Across the room, their eyes met. Charlotte smiled, not her practiced corporate smile, but something real and gentle. Eli found himself smiling back, feeling the weight of the past weeks lifting just a little. In that moment of shared quiet, with the day's success surrounding them, they found a pocket of peace neither had expected. The old wall clock in Turner's Groceries ticked past midnight. Most of Maplewood slept peacefully, but inside the store's storage room, a small spark danced between frayed wires hidden behind decades-old panels. The spark grew, finding purchase in cardboard boxes stacked nearby. Eli Turner tossed in his bed above the store, his mind filled with plans for tomorrow's Faith Feeds launch. A faint crackling sound filtered through his floorboards. He dismissed it at first. The building's old bones often creaked and groaned. But then came the smell, acrid, sharp, wrong. His eyes snapped open. Smoke. He bolted upright, his heart hammering. Lila! He rushed to his daughter's room, scooping her from her bed. She stirred, confused and groggy. Daddy, what's happening? We need to get out, sweetheart. His voice stayed calm for her sake, but his hands shook as he grabbed his phone. Downstairs, orange flames licked through the storage room door. Eli set Lila down near the front entrance. Stay here, he ordered, then dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's voice crackled through. Fire department is on their way. "Sir, please evacuate immediately." But Eli couldn't just watch his wife's legacy burn. He grabbed the fire extinguisher and charged toward the storage room. The heat pushed him back, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. A car screeched to a halt outside. Charlotte Vale burst through the front door, still wearing her day clothes as if she'd never gone to sleep. "Eli," she shouted, "what are you doing?" "The inventory," he coughed. "The store. Get out." Charlotte grabbed Lila's hand, leading her outside. She ran back in for Eli, who was still fighting the growing flames. "It's not worth your life." The fire spread faster now, consuming shelves and jumping to the ceiling. Wooden beams groaned ominously overhead. Charlotte seized Eli's arm with surprising strength, dragging him toward the exit. "Let go, please," he begged. "Your daughter needs you more than this store does." Those words cut through his desperate determination. He stumbled backward, letting Charlotte pull him out just as part of the ceiling collapsed where he'd stood seconds before. They emerged into the cold night air. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, some in pajamas, others hastily dressed. Red and blue lights flashed as fire trucks arrived, but everyone knew it was too late. The flames had spread too far, too fast. Lila clung to her father, crying quietly. Eli held her close, his face ashen as he watched firefighters battle the inferno. Charlotte stood beside them, her hand on Lila's shoulder, all three watching helplessly as Turner's groceries burned. Hours crawled by. Dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and grays, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Where the store had stood for 40 years, only charred walls remained. The roof had completely caved in. Everything inside the old register, the hand-painted signs, the family photos on the wall, was gone. The fire chief approached with a grim expression. "We've done our preliminary investigation," he said. "Looks like an electrical fire, those old wiring systems." Eli nodded numbly. He'd known the radical bow. Wiring needed updating, but there had never been enough money. Always another bill, another repair, another crisis to handle first. By mid-morning, the insurance assessor arrived. He picked through the ruins, taking photos and making notes. His verdict came swiftly and without mercy. Claim denied. Faulty maintenance constitutes negligence. It's clearly stated in your policy. The words washed over Eli like cold water. He'd lost everything twice, now first, Sarah, and now her store. His legs felt weak. Charlotte guided him to sit on a nearby bench, while Lila curled up against him, exhausted from the long night. "We'll appeal," Charlotte said firmly. "I know lawyers who—" "It's over." Eli cut her off, his voice hollow. "Maybe this is God's way of telling me to let go." Charlotte stood up straight, staring at the smoking ruins. Her face set in determination as she whispered, barely audible, "I'll fix this, even if he never knows." Throughout the morning, people from town brought coffee, blankets, and words of comfort, but Eli barely registered them. He sat there, holding Lila, watching as workers erected yellow caution tape around what remained of his life's work. The morning sun cast long shadows through the skeleton of Turner's groceries. Broken glass crunched under boots. The air still smelled of smoke and lost dreams. Charlotte remained beside the ruins, her designer clothes smudged with soot, her eyes fixed on the destruction before her. Her whispered promise hung in the air, a quiet oath against the morning breeze. Days after the fire, golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen window of Eli and Lila's small apartment above what remained of Turner's groceries. Math worksheets covered their worn wooden table, but Eli's thoughts weren't on fractions. His eyes kept drifting to the charred ceiling of the store below, visible through their kitchen window. "Dad?" Lila's small voice pulled him back. "Is this right?" She pushed her notebook toward him, her careful handwriting filling the page. Eli blinked, forcing himself to focus on the numbers. "Let me see, sweetheart." He pulled the paper closer, but the digits seemed to swim before his eyes. The insurance company's final rejection letter lay heavy in his back pocket, edges worn from how many times he'd unfolded and reread it. "Sorry, let me." He cleared his throat, squinting at the problems. 7 times 8 is 56. Lila finished for him. "I got that one. It's the word problems I don't understand." Eli nodded, but his mind wandered again. The few remaining Faith Feeds volunteers had stopped coming by. Their phones had gone quiet. Even Charlotte hadn't been seen since the day after the fire. The silence felt like abandonment all over again. "If Johnny has 3 apples," Lila read aloud, "and Sarah gives him twice as many." She paused, watching her father's distant expression. "Dad, are you okay?" Eli forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired, sweetie." He ran a hand through his hair, noticing more gray in the bathroom mirror that morning. Actually, there's something we need to talk about. Lila set down her pencil, her young face suddenly serious. She had her mother's intuition always sensing when something was wrong. The store. Eli began, his voice rough. With the insurance not covering the repairs and our savings almost gone. He took a deep breath. We might need to move. Maybe to Grandma's house in Ohio, just until we… No! Lila's cry was sharp, desperate. Her hand flew to the gold locket around her neck, her mother's last gift. We can't leave Mom's store. She always said, I know what she said. Eli cut in, gentler than he meant to. That kindness comes back around. That faith moves mountains. But sometimes, he swallowed hard. Sometimes life has other plans. Lila's fingers traced the worn surface of the locket. Mom said miracles take time, she whispered. She said we have to be patient. The words hit Eli like a physical blow. Sarah had said that during her final days in the hospital, when hope was slipping away like sand through their fingers. He'd believed it then. But now, your mom was very wise, he managed. But she also believed in being practical, and right now, a metallic clang from outside interrupted him. The mailbox. I'll get it. Lila jumped up, grateful for the distraction. Eli watched her dart down the external stairs to the mailbox mounted beside the store's boarded-up entrance. She returned moments later, clutching a plain white envelope. No return address, just Eli Turner, typed neatly on the front. What is it? She asked, handing it over. Eli turned the envelope in his hands, frowning at its weight. Using his butter knife as an impromptu letter opener, he slid it carefully. Several papers slid out onto the table. His hands began to shake as he read the first page, then the second, and the third. Dad? Lila's voice seemed to come from far away. What's wrong? Eli blinked rapidly, reading the documents again. It was a deed, a proper, legal deed to a storefront just 2 blocks away, the old hardware store that had closed last spring. The property had been purchased, renovated, and transferred into his name. All the paperwork was complete, notarized, ironclad. I don't understand, he whispered. The attached note was typed, unsigned, for faith feeds. Some dreams are worth saving. Are we moving? Lila asked in a small voice. Eli looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in days. She held her mother's locket like a lifeline, her eyes wide with worry and hope. Yes, he said slowly. But not to Ohio, just down the street. He showed her the deed. Someone just gave us a new store. A miracle? Lila's face lit up. Eli stared at the papers, his throat tight. Maybe your mom was right about patience after all. Lila threw her arms around his neck. Can we go see it, please? We should finish your homework first, Eli said automatically, but his own hands were itching to touch those brick walls, to start planning shelves and displays, to believe again. Just one peek? Lila begged. The math problems will still be here when we get back. Eli looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at the deed in his trembling hands. The familiar ache of missing Sarah squeezed his heart, but for the first time in weeks, it was accompanied by something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Okay, he said softly, one peek. Lila was already running for her shoes, but Eli remained seated for a moment longer. He touched the papers gently, as if they might disappear. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was, thanking the anonymous donor, Sarah's memory, or maybe even God. The mailbox clanged again outside, its hollow echo a reminder of how quickly life could change. But this time, the sound carried possibility instead of dread. Eli stood, folded the deed carefully, and went to join his daughter at the door. Morning dew clung to Eli's worn work boots as he walked slowly down Maple Street. The crisp deed clutched in his weathered hand like a precious lifeline. Each step echoed hollowly on the quiet sidewalk, the only sound besides the gentle rustle of autumn leaves overhead. The address Sarah Mitchell had given him led to the old Peterson Hardware building, a place he'd passed countless times over the years, watching it slowly decay into a forgotten relic of better days. Except the building before him now wasn't the dusty, abandoned storefront he remembered from his childhood. Fresh, cream-colored paint covered every inch of the brick walls, so pristine it seemed to glow in the early morning light. Gleaming windows reflected the rising sun like mirrors, their surfaces spotless and inviting. A large cloth-covered sign hung above the entrance, stirring gently in the cool morning breeze that carried the scent of freshly turned earth and possibility. His footsteps slowed to a near stop as he approached, his heart hammering against his ribs. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Gone were the cracked window panes that had been patched with cardboard and duct tape. The faded, torn awning that had flapped uselessly in storms for decades had been replaced by a crisp new one in deep forest green. New wooden benches flanked the entrance, their honey-colored wood still bearing the sweet scent of fresh lumber. Planters overflowing with golden and rust-colored chrysanthemums added warm splashes of color that seemed to dance in the gentle breeze. Even the sidewalk had been pressure washed to a pristine gray, erasing decades of neglect and staining. A professional-looking woman in a crisp navy blazer stood by the polished front door, checking an expensive watch on her wrist. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the confident air of someone accustomed to handling important transactions. "Mr. Turner?" She extended a manicured hand with a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from Cornerstone Realty. Thank you so much for coming out so early this morning. I know this must all seem very mysterious." Eli shook her hand with his calloused one, still taking in every detail of the building's transformed facade. His voice came out rough and uncertain. "I got your message last night, but I'm afraid there must be some kind of mistake. I didn't arrange to meet about any property, and I certainly didn't. No mistake at all." Sarah interrupted gently, her warm smile never wavering. She produced a ring of shiny new keys from her briefcase, the metal catching the morning light. "The property has been purchased and paid for in full by a private donor. They were very specific that you should have complete ownership, free and clear." The heavy front door swung open with a satisfied click, revealing a completely renovated interior that took Eli's breath away. He stepped inside and felt his knees go weak. Brand new shelving units lined the walls, their rich oak wood matching the polished hardwood floor that gleamed under rows of modern LED lighting. The space felt open and welcoming, with wide aisles and carefully planned sightlines. Modern refrigeration cases hummed quietly along the back wall, their glass fronts crystal clear and fog-free. The checkout counter gleamed with brand new equipment, including a state-of-the-art point-of-sale system that looked like something from a much larger chain store. "This is..." Eli trailed off, completely overwhelmed by the scope of what he was seeing. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "This is impossible." The space was easily twice the size of his old store, with soaring ceilings and exposed brick walls that had been carefully restored to their original beauty. Warm pendant lights hung at perfect intervals, casting pools of golden light that made everything feel cozy despite the generous square footage. Sarah led him through each carefully planned section, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "There's a full commercial kitchen in the back for community meals and events," she explained, opening a door to reveal gleaming stainless steel appliances and prep surfaces. Separate climate-controlled storage area for dry goods and seasonal inventory. Office space upstairs with a view of the town square. She gestured toward a narrow staircase with a hand-carved banister. "There's even a small reading nook for children over here by the windows, complete with built-in bookshelves and soft cushions." Eli followed her in stunned silence, his work-roughened hands trailing along the smooth surfaces, checking to make sure this wasn't all an elaborate dream. His mind raced as he tried to process the implications. This level of renovation would easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. The craftsmanship was exceptional, from the carefully restored hardwood floors to the custom millwork around the windows. "Who?" he finally managed to ask, his voice cracking slightly. "Who could possibly have done all this?" Sarah shook her head apologetically, her expression sympathetic but firm. "The donor has insisted on complete anonymity. I'm bound by strict confidentiality agreements. All I can tell you is that everything has been handled down to the smallest detail. Permits, inspections, utilities, even the landscaping outside. The building is ready to open for business whenever you are." His thoughts immediately flew to Charlotte. She'd disappeared completely after the fire, and now this miraculous gift appeared out of nowhere. But how could she possibly afford something like this after resigning from her high-paying position? And why would she choose to remain anonymous after everything they'd been through together? "There must be some paperwork," Eli pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Some kind of record or trail that shows who..." "The entire transaction was handled through a private trust," Sarah explained patiently, clearly accustomed to these questions. "Very carefully structured to protect the donor's privacy while ensuring everything is completely legal and above board." She handed him a thick manila envelope sealed with official-looking tape. "These are all the documents you'll need for ownership, transfer, tax records, everything. The insurance policy is fully paid for the first year. There's even a substantial startup fund already deposited in an account for initial inventory and operating expenses. Eli walked the space again, his footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. The morning light streamed through the large windows, creating shifting pools of warmth that seemed to follow him as he moved. Everything was perfect, too. Perfect, like something out of a dream he'd never dared to have. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts to Charlotte's number with fingers that felt clumsy and uncertain. The call went straight to voicemail, just as it had for days and days. "This is absolutely incredible," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion that threatened to overwhelm him completely. "But I honestly don't know if I can accept something this generous. It doesn't feel right to—" "The donor was very clear about that too," Sarah interrupted gently, her voice soft with understanding. "They specifically asked me to tell you that this isn't charity or a handout. They called it an investment in hope and community." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with what looked like inside knowledge. "They also said something about kindness always finding its way back around to those who need it most." Eli's heart skipped a beat, then began racing. Those were his late wife's exact words, a phrase she'd repeated countless times during their marriage, words he'd only shared with Charlotte during one of their long, quiet conversations at the old store while Lila played in the aisles. Sarah gestured toward the covered sign hanging outside, visible through the pristine front windows. "Would you like to do the honors and unveil it properly?" They stepped back out into the cool morning air, where the autumn breeze carried the scent of changing leaves and new possibilities. Sarah handed him a long pole with a brass hook on the end, the metal cool against his palm. Eli's hand shook visibly as he reached up toward the cloth covering, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Sarah could hear it. With one smooth, careful motion, he caught the edge of the fabric and pulled it free. The sign was breathtakingly beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Dark forest green letters on a cream background spelled out "Faith Feeds Market" in a classic, timeless font that spoke of permanence and tradition. Below, in smaller but equally elegant text, the words "A Community Grocery" seemed to glow in the morning light. Eli stared up at the words for a long moment, his vision blurring as tears he couldn't control began to well up in his eyes. It was everything his beloved wife had dreamed of during their late-night conversations, not just a simple store, but a true community hub where neighbors could gather, where faith and food could nourish both body and soul, where hope could take root and flourish. Sarah pressed the warm keys into his trembling palm, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Welcome home, Mr. Turner. I think this is exactly where you belong." The sunset painted Maplewood's main street in shades of amber and gold as Eli parked his old pickup truck outside the Pine Valley Motel. The neon vacancy sign buzzed softly, casting a pink glow across the cracked pavement. His heart thumped against his ribs as he approached the front office, a small bell chiming as he pushed open the door. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly motel owner, looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Well, if it isn't Eli Turner, what brings you by this evening?" "I'm looking for Charlotte Vale," Eli said, his voice rougher than he intended. "She was staying here a while back, room 12, I think." Mrs. Peterson's face softened with recognition. "Oh, that nice lady from the city? She checked out 3 days ago, dear. Didn't say where she was headed." Eli's shoulders slumped. "Did she leave any forwarding address? A phone number?" "'Fraid not." Mrs. Peterson adjusted her reading glasses. "But now that you mention it, she did leave something behind." She reached under the counter and pulled out a familiar silk scarf, the same one Charlotte had forgotten at his store on that stormy first day. "Found it when we cleaned the room. I was meaning to drop it by your store, but then—" She trailed off, both of them thinking about the charred remains of Turner's groceries. Eli took the scarf, the fabric smooth and cool against his calloused fingers. The pale blue pattern seemed to shimmer in the office's fluorescent light. It still held a trace of her perfume, something expensive and subtle, like vanilla and rain. "You know, Mrs." Peterson said gently. "She spent a lot of time asking about you and your family, about Sarah, too." The mention of his late wife's name made Eli's chest tighten. He ran his thumb across the silk, remembering how Charlotte had gradually changed during her time in Maplewood, how her sharp edges had softened, how genuine warmth had replaced her corporate mask. He walked out to the motel's courtyard, where a small fountain bubbled quietly. The scarf in his hands felt like more than just forgotten clothing. It was a symbol of transformation, of endings and beginnings. Like Charlotte herself, it was both delicate and strong, complex and simple. Sitting on a weathered bench, Eli thought about the mysterious deed to the new store, The timing couldn't be coincidence. Charlotte had lost her career, her status, everything she'd built, and somehow she'd still found a way to help him rebuild. The evening air grew cooler as memories washed over him. Charlotte stocking shelves with careful precision, her surprised laughter when Lila taught her to make paper airplanes, the quiet conversations they'd shared over coffee after closing time. She'd gone from being the woman who'd tried to use his kindness for publicity to someone who'd given up everything to protect his reputation. A young couple walked past, hand in hand, reminding Eli of all the moments he'd wanted to reach for Charlotte but held back. Fear, pride, and lingering hurt had kept him distant, even as he'd watched her change, even as his own heart had begun to heal. The silk scarf caught the last rays of sunlight, its pattern reminiscent of flowing water. Like the current of a river, Charlotte had swept into his life, reshaping its banks, carving new channels of possibility, and like water, she had slipped away just when he'd realized how much he needed her presence. Standing up, Eli carefully folded the scarf and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. The weight of it felt right somehow, like a promise waiting to be kept. In the growing darkness, he looked up at the star-scattered sky, the same stars that might be shining wherever Charlotte was now. "Thank you, Charlotte," he whispered, his voice carrying all the things he wished he'd said sooner. Then, with renewed purpose, he headed back to his truck. He would find her not just to express gratitude for the new store, but to tell her everything his heart had finally learned to say. The scarf in his pocket was just the beginning. Like the first time she left it behind, it meant their story wasn't over. It was waiting for the next chapter to begin. The morning sun beat down on Eli's pickup truck as he drove past endless cornfields, following directions from Mary at the diner who'd spotted Charlotte at Hope Valley Farm. The old truck's engine grumbled as he turned onto a dusty road, white fence posts marking the way to a sprawling property where vegetables grew in neat rows and chickens pecked at the ground. He parked next to a weathered red barn and stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled of fresh earth and hay. A group of volunteers worked in the distance, harvesting tomatoes. Among them, a familiar figure in mud-stained jeans and a faded t-shirt stood out, so different from the perfectly pressed suits she used to wear. Charlotte didn't notice him at first. She was showing a young boy how to tell if a tomato was ripe, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, face flushed from the sun. She looked more real than he'd ever seen her. "Charlotte," he called out softly. She froze, then slowly turned around. Her eyes widened with recognition, and for a moment, she looked like she might bolt. Instead, she straightened up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Eli," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you find me?" "Small towns talk," he replied with a gentle smile, "especially when someone's been doing good work." Charlotte excused herself from the other volunteers and walked over to him. Up close, he could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she held herself like she was bracing for judgment. "Would you like to talk?" he asked, gesturing toward the barn. She nodded, and they walked in silence to the old structure. Inside, sunlight streamed through gaps in the wooden walls, dust motes dancing in the beams. They found a spot near some hay bales, the sweet smell of dried grass surrounding them. "The new store?" Eli began, watching her carefully. "It wasn't just some anonymous donor, was it?" Charlotte looked down at her dirt-stained hands. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered. "Charlotte," he said softly, "I know it was you. What I don't understand is why you left without saying anything." She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "I sold my penthouse," she admitted finally, "and my beach house in the Hamptons. The mansion, too." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Turns out I didn't need all that space anyway." Eli sat there, stunned by the magnitude of her sacrifice. "You gave up everything?" "Not everything," she corrected him, finally meeting his eyes. "I found something better. Here, working with these people, I feel real. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to patter on the barn's metal roof. The sound created a cozy cocoon around their conversation. "You didn't have to hide it," Eli said. "What you did for the store, for the town?" "Yes, I did," she interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "I needed to do it without any cameras, without publicity, without anyone knowing. I needed to prove to myself more than anyone that I could do something good just because it was right." The rain fell harder now, creating a steady drumming overhead. A tear slid down Charlotte's cheek, but she smiled through it. "The store," she continued, "it's in Lila's name. I made sure of that. No one can take it away from her. The Faith Feeds Market will always be there for the community. Eli felt his own eyes growing wet. You've changed so much from that woman who walked into my store that stormy night, because you showed me what real integrity looks like, she said. When you covered my bill that day, even though you could barely afford it, you weren't trying to prove anything. You were just being kind. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. The smell of wet earth drifted in through the barn doors, mixing with the sweet hay. Thank you, Eli said finally, his voice rough with emotion, not just for the store, but for showing Lila that people can change, that second chances are real. Charlotte wiped her eyes, smiling. Thank you for giving me that second chance. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt less like an ending and more like a cleansing, washing away the last traces of doubt and mistrust between them. They sat together in the peaceful quiet of the barn, both smiling through their tears, finally at peace with where their unlikely journey had led them. The morning sky blazed brilliant blue over Maplewood's Main Street as crowds gathered outside the newly renovated Faith Feeds Market. The fresh paint gleamed in the sunlight, warm cream walls with forest green trim, just like the original Turner's Groceries. A brand new sign hung proudly above the entrance, its gold letters catching the light. Faith Feeds Market, where kindness grows. Charlotte Vale stood at the back of the assembled crowd, wearing a simple blue dress instead of her usual designer suits. She watched as Mayor Thompson cut the ceremonial ribbon while camera flashes lit up the storefront. The transformation from the ashes of the old store was remarkable. What once lay in ruins now stood as a symbol of renewal. Eli Turner stepped up to the podium, looking sharp but humble in pressed khakis and a crisp white shirt. His daughter Lila beamed beside him in her Sunday best, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. The gathered townspeople, easily over 200 strong, fell quiet as Eli cleared his throat. A month ago, this spot was nothing but ashes and broken dreams. He began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I thought I'd lost everything my late wife Sarah and I had built together. I questioned my faith, questioned whether kindness really did come back around like she always said it would. A gentle murmur rippled through the crowd. Many remembered Sarah Turner and her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears as Eli continued. But sometimes life sends us angels in unexpected packages, he said, his eyes finding Charlotte in the crowd. Sometimes the person who seems furthest from grace turns out to be the one who helps us find it again. The crowd turned, following his gaze. Charlotte wanted to shrink back, to disappear, but she forced herself to stand tall. This was part of redemption, facing the truth of who she'd been and who she'd become. This market isn't just a store, Eli went on. It's a promise to our community. Every item on our shelves will be priced fairly. 10% of all profits will go directly to feeding families in need. And nobody will ever be turned away hungry, whether they can pay or not. Applause broke out, punctuated by a few emotional amens from the older church ladies in front. Lila bounced on her toes, practically vibrating with excitement as she watched her father speak. But before we open these doors, there's someone special I need to acknowledge, Eli said, gesturing toward the back of the crowd. Charlotte Vale, would you please come up here? Charlotte's heart jumped into her throat. This wasn't part of the plan. She'd specifically asked to stay in the background to let this be Eli's moment. But as the crowd parted to make way for her, she saw the warmth in his eyes and knew she couldn't refuse. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk as she made her way forward. Each step felt like walking through molasses as familiar faces turned to watch her pass. These were people who'd seen her at her worst, arrogant, deceptive, cold. But they were also the ones who'd witnessed her change, who'd watched her stock shelves and bag groceries and slowly learned what real value meant. When she reached the podium, Eli extended his hand. She took it, surprised by the strength of his grip, the calluses earned from honest work. He drew her up beside him, and suddenly she was facing the crowd, heart pounding. This woman, Eli said, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air, reminded us all that hearts can change, that it's never too late to choose what's right over what's easy. That true success isn't measured in dollars or status, but in the lives we touch and the good we do. Charlotte blinked rapidly, fighting back tears as Eli continued. When our old store burned down, I thought it was the end. What I didn't know was that Charlotte had secretly sold her mansion, everything she owned, to rebuild this place. Not for profit or publicity, but because she believed in what we were trying to do here. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by scattered applause. Charlotte hadn't wanted this revealed, but seeing the genuine amazement and respect in people's faces made her realize maybe it was okay to let the truth be known. So today, Eli concluded, as we open these doors, we're not just starting a business. We're continuing a legacy of kindness that started with my wife Sarah, was saved by Charlotte's generosity, and will go on as long as there are people who believe in doing what's right, even when no one's watching. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Charlotte felt a small hand slip into hers and looked down to find Lila grinning up at her, those big brown eyes shining with joy. Before she could react, the little girl had wrapped her arms around Charlotte's waist in a fierce hug. Tears spilled onto Charlotte's cheeks as she hugged Lila back, no longer caring who saw. When she looked up, Eli was watching them with such tenderness, it made her heart ache. He stepped closer, and suddenly his arms were around both of them, a family forged in faith, failure, and forgiveness. The applause grew louder as the three of them stood together, while above them, the morning sun caught the gold letters of the sign, Faith Feeds Market, where kindness grows. The morning rush at Faith Feeds Market had become a comfortable rhythm. Eli restocked the fresh produce while Charlotte counted change at the register, her designer watch replaced by a simple timepiece that matched her new life. The store hummed with activity, not the frantic pace of corporate retail, but the steady warmth of community. Mrs. Peterson needs help with her bags again, Charlotte called out, already moving from behind the counter. Her heels were gone too, replaced by practical flats that carried her swiftly across the polished floors. Eli watched her gather the elderly woman's groceries, noting how naturally she smiled now. Gone was the sharp-edged CEO who'd first stormed into his store during that fateful thunderstorm. In her place stood someone real, someone who belonged. "I've got it, dear," Charlotte told Mrs. Peterson, who patted her hand with grandmotherly affection. "Such a blessing you are to this community, Mrs. Peterson said. "Both of you." Later that afternoon, while arranging a display of local honey, Eli caught Charlotte humming to herself, something she'd picked up from Lila. The sight made him smile. His daughter had taken to Charlotte immediately after the reopening, as though she'd known all along that beneath the corporate armor beat a heart of gold. "Delivery truck's here early," Eli announced, checking his watch. "I'll help," Charlotte offered, already rolling up her sleeves. She'd learned the rhythm of store work quickly, throwing herself into every task with the same determination she'd once reserved for board meetings. Together, they unloaded boxes in comfortable silence. Occasionally, their hands would brush, and neither pulled away too quickly anymore. The awkwardness of their past had melted into something warmer, more honest. "Remember when I couldn't tell a stock rotation date from an expiration date?" Charlotte laughed, breaking their quiet concentration. "You've come a long way from that first day of volunteering," Eli agreed, thinking back to how she'd struggled with the simple tasks she now performed effortlessly. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the newly installed floors. Local shoppers moved through the aisles, greeting each other by name. The store had become more than just a market. It was a gathering place, a symbol of resilience. Charlotte paused while pricing cans of soup. "I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this," she admitted softly. "All those years chasing success, and here it was, hiding in plain sight." Eli nodded, understanding. His own journey from grief to healing had surprised him too. "Sometimes we find answers in unexpected places," he said, thinking of his renewed faith. The fire that had destroyed his store should have broken him completely. Instead, it had opened the door to something greater. During the afternoon lull, they sat together at the small break table, sharing coffee from the same pot that had welcomed Charlotte on her first visit. The moment felt natural, like so many pieces falling into place. "The Faith Feeds program helped 3 more families this week," Charlotte reported, her eyes bright with purpose. The initiative had grown beyond their initial hopes, spreading to neighboring towns. "Sarah's kids have lunch money now," Eli added, referring to a single mother who'd recently lost her job. The community fund made sure of that. Charlotte's expression softened. "This is what real success feels like, isn't it? This is what matters." Eli agreed. The bell above the door chimed as Lila burst in after school, her backpack bouncing. She made a beeline for Charlotte, waving a piece of paper. "Look what I drew in art class today." Charlotte accepted the offered artwork, and her breath caught. On the paper, drawn in bright crayon, stood 3 figures holding hands: a tall man with brown hair, a little girl with pigtails, and a woman with golden hair. Above them, Lila had written in careful letters, "My family. That's Dad, me, and you." Lila explained unnecessarily, beaming. Mrs. Johnson said to draw the people we love. Charlotte's eyes met Eli's across the space between them, filled with unexpected emotion. He smiled gently, acknowledging the truth in his daughter's simple wisdom. They had become a family of sorts, not in the traditional way, but in the way that mattered most. Thank you, sweetheart. Charlotte managed, carefully folding the drawing and tucking it into her pocket, right next to her heart. I'll keep it forever. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of ordinary moments, made extraordinary by their shared contentment. Charlotte helped Lila with her math homework while Eli assisted customers. They worked together to close up shop, falling into an easy routine they developed over the past weeks. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the store windows, Lila sat at the counter coloring, while Eli and Charlotte tallied the day's receipts. The numbers were steady, not remarkable by corporate standards, but enough to keep the dream alive and help others along the way. Aunt Charlotte, Lila called out, the new title falling naturally from her lips. Can you help me reach the cookies on the top shelf? Dad says I can have one after dinner. Charlotte's eyes sparkled as she reached for the package, sharing a knowing look with Eli. The simple word aunt had become something precious between them, a recognition of the bonds that had grown from the ashes of their past mistakes. The store, once just a building, had become the heart of their healing. Here, among the neat aisles and friendly faces, Charlotte had found the humanity she'd lost in her rise to corporate power. Here, Eli had rediscovered his faith in goodness and second chances. And here, in the warm light of a community rebuilt, Lila's drawing told the simplest truth. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stay, who help you rebuild when everything falls apart, who find their way into your heart one small kindness at a time. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Charlotte placed her single suitcase in the bed of Eli's pickup truck. The morning air held that special crispness that made everything feel new and possible. She wore simple jeans and a light sweater, clothes that would have shocked her former board members but now felt like home. Got everything? Eli asked, his voice carrying across the quiet parking lot of Faith Feeds Market. The store wouldn't open for another few hours, but its new sign gleamed proudly in the early light. I think so. Charlotte patted her pockets, checking for essentials. Though I'm still not sure about this whole bus thing. I used to have a private driver, you know. Her teasing smile took any sting from the words. Lila bounded out of the house next door, her backpack bouncing. I made you something. She thrust a slightly crumpled envelope into Charlotte's hands. But don't open it until you're on the bus, okay? Charlotte knelt down, pulling the little girl into a tight hug. I promise. And I'll call every week to hear about school. And the store. Lila added firmly. You have to hear about the store too. Of course. Charlotte's voice wavered slightly. Someone needs to make sure your dad doesn't give away too many free apples. Hey now. Eli protested, but his eyes crinkled with warmth. Those apples help people. They piled into the truck, Lila claiming the middle seat. The drive to the bus station was quiet, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes from hearts that understand each other. Charlotte watched the familiar streets of Maplewood roll by, the coffee shop where she'd learned to appreciate simple brews, the park where she'd helped organize their first community food drive, the church where she'd finally found the courage to attend a service. At a stoplight, Eli spoke softly. You know, when you first came to town, I never would have believed we'd be here. Here meant so many things. The rebuilt store, the growing Faith Feeds program, the way the community had healed. Charlotte nodded, understanding all of it. I was so lost then, she admitted, focused on all the wrong things. And now? Eli glanced at her, his expression gentle. Now I know where I'm supposed to be. She smiled, touching the simple folder in her lap that contained her plans for expanding Faith Feeds into other struggling communities, even if that means leaving for a little while. The bus station was small, just a covered bench and a ticket window. They arrived early, watching the sun climb higher over the buildings. Lila insisted on helping Charlotte carry her suitcase, though it was nearly as big as she was. Did you pack snacks? Lila asked seriously. Dad always says long trips need snacks. Charlotte patted her bag. 3 different kinds of granola bars, and some of those dried apple chips from the store. The ones Dad makes? Of course. Nothing else would do. They heard the bus before they saw it, its diesel engine echoing off the empty streets. Charlotte took a deep breath, suddenly uncertain. This was right. She knew it was right, but leaving felt harder than she'd expected. Eli must have sensed her hesitation. He touched her arm lightly. Hey, remember what you told me when we reopened the store? That some leaps of faith are worth taking? Exactly. His smile was steady, reassuring. This is yours. The bus pulled up with a whoosh of brakes. Charlotte hugged Lila again, holding her tight. Be good for your dad, okay? And keep drawing. I want to see new pictures when I get back. I'll draw the whole town, Lila promised. And all the people we help. Finally, Charlotte turned to Eli. Their hug was brief but solid, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through together. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me what really matters. Thank you for helping me believe again, he replied quietly. In people, in second chances. I'll be back in a month, Charlotte said, picking up her suitcase. Sooner if these other towns are half as stubborn as Maplewood. We'll keep your apron ready, Eli promised. Charlotte climbed the bus steps, finding a window seat near the middle. As the engine rumbled to life, she saw Eli and Lila get back into the truck. But instead of leaving, they waited, watching as the bus slowly pulled away from the curb. Through the open truck window, Lila's voice rang out clear and sweet. Come back soon. Charlotte waved until the truck was out of sight, then settled back in her seat. Her fingers found Lila's envelope, and she opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures in front of a building with faith feeds written in wobbly letters. At the bottom, Lila had written, Our family helps people. The bus rolled on toward the highway, and Charlotte held the drawing close, smiling through tears that didn't feel sad at all. They felt like promise, like purpose, like grace, found in the most ordinary things. The autumn breeze rustled through the newly planted maple trees outside Faith Feeds Market, their golden leaves dancing in the crisp October air. 6 months had passed since Charlotte's quiet departure, and the store had flourished in ways Eli never imagined possible. The aisles were now stocked with both affordable basics and carefully chosen organic products, creating a perfect balance that served everyone in the community, from struggling families to health-conscious shoppers who drove in from neighboring towns. The transformation was remarkable. Where once empty shelves had stood as monuments to his failing business, now colorful displays of fresh produce, locally sourced honey, and children's snacks created an inviting atmosphere. Hand-painted signs hung throughout the store, many crafted by local high school art students as part of a community service project Charlotte had initiated before leaving. The walls bore cheerful murals depicting scenes of harvest and abundance, replacing the faded promotional posters that had yellowed with age. Eli sat at the new checkout counter, absently adjusting the small frame that held Lila's latest artwork, a crayon masterpiece showing their store with a rainbow arching overhead and stick figures holding hands in front of it. The drawing included tiny details only a child would think to add. A smiling sun wearing sunglasses, a dog wagging its tail near the entrance, and careful block letters spelling out "Love Lives Here" across the bottom. The morning rush had finally settled into the peaceful lull he'd grown to cherish, leaving him a quiet moment to catch up on paperwork and inventory orders. The cash register, donated by the Rotary Club after the fire, gleamed under the warm fluorescent lights. Receipts from the morning sales lay neatly stacked beside it, each one representing a small victory, a family fed, a dream sustained. Mrs. Peterson's weekly grocery run, the Martinez family's bulk rice purchase, young Tommy Walsh buying candy with his allowance money. Each transaction told a story of community resilience. A subtle movement on one of the security monitors caught his eye, drawing his attention away from the invoices spread before him. He leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses, the same pair Sarah had teased him about needing back when she was alive, to notice such things. The black and white display showed the rear entrance, where a woman in simple jeans and a cream-colored sweater was carefully helping a young mother load groceries into a worn-out minivan. The helper moved with a familiar grace that made his heart skip a beat, her posture radiating the kind of gentle confidence he'd watched develop over months of shared service. Charlotte was back. She looked remarkably different from the formidable CEO who had first stormed into his store during that long-ago thunderstorm. Her heels clicking against the linoleum like war drums. Gone were the sharp-edged business suits and the armor of perfect makeup applied with military precision. Her designer handbags and imported shoes had been replaced by casual clothes that looked lived in and comfortable jeans with a small paint stain on the knee, sneakers that had clearly walked many miles, a sweater that suggested warmth over status. Her hair, once severely styled into submission, with enough hairspray to weather a hurricane, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the afternoon light with natural highlights that no salon could replicate. But the biggest change was in how she moved, relaxed, unhurried, at peace with herself and her place in the world. The rigid posture of corporate authority had melted into something fluid and genuine. Where once she had commanded every room she entered, now she seemed content to serve quietly, to blend into the background of ordinary kindness. Eli watched, transfixed, as Charlotte handed the young mother, whom he recognized as Sarah Mills from the low-income apartment complex down the street, an extra bag of groceries that hadn't been part of the original purchase. Sarah tried to protest, her hands gesturing in the universal language of, "I can't accept this," but Charlotte just smiled and shook her head with gentle insistence. There were no cameras rolling for publicity, no press releases waiting to be written, no photographers capturing the moment for social media. Just a simple act of kindness performed when she thought no one was watching, the kind of authentic generosity that couldn't be manufactured or marketed. The scene transported him back to that first day, when he'd quietly covered Charlotte's declined card without fanfare or expectation of reward. How impossibly far they'd both traveled since then through the viral video that had turned their lives upside down. The scandal that had threatened everything they held dear, the devastating fire that had reduced his dreams to ash and smoke. All of it had somehow led to this moment, this beautiful transformation that felt like grace made visible. Through the store's modest speaker system, soft gospel music played one of his late wife's favorite songs about grace and second chances, about how love could work miracles in the most ordinary places. The timing felt divinely orchestrated, like a gentle reminder from above that sometimes the longest and most difficult roads lead exactly where they're supposed to. Sarah had hummed this same song while stocking shelves in the early days of their marriage, her voice carrying hope even when their bank account carried worry. On the security monitor, Sarah's minivan pulled away with a small wave, and Charlotte stood alone for a moment in the parking lot, taking in the sight of the rebuilt store with obvious emotion. The security camera caught her reaching out to touch the Faith Feeds Market sign with gentle fingers, as if she needed to make sure it was real and not just another dream that might disappear. The wooden sign, hand-carved by Pete Morrison from the hardware store, bore the simple logo they designed together, a heart surrounding a wheat stalk, symbolizing love that nourishes. The familiar chime of the front door interrupted his reverie as Mrs. Henderson, their sprightly elderly neighbor with silver hair and twinkling eyes, entered with her usual warm greeting that could brighten even the gloomiest morning. "Morning, Eli. My goodness, is that Charlotte I saw out back helping young Sarah with her groceries?" "Sure is," he replied, setting aside his paperwork to help her with her shopping basket, the same wicker basket she'd carried for 30 years, now held together with careful repairs and stubborn love. Though I think she was hoping to slip in quietly, without making a big fuss about it. "That girl?" Mrs. Henderson chuckled, shaking her head with fond exasperation. "Always trying to hide her light under a bushel these days. Such a remarkable change from when she first came to town, like a tornado in high heels. Remember how she used to stride around like she owned the whole world?" Eli nodded, his memory drifting to the bride. Headlines that had followed Charlotte's dramatic resignation and her subsequent quiet work with Faith Feeds. The business magazines had called her career suicide. The gossip blogs had predicted she'd crawl back to corporate life within months. Instead, she'd helped establish similar community markets in 3 other struggling towns across the Midwest, always staying carefully behind the scenes, letting local leaders take the credit while she did the unglamorous work of organizing supply chains and securing funding. The back door opened with a soft creak, and Charlotte stepped inside, carrying a stack of empty produce boxes that she'd clearly been using to help with deliveries. She froze when she saw Eli watching her, caught in an unplanned moment of reunion. Her cheeks flushed slightly, pink another change from the woman who once commanded hostile boardrooms without so much as blinking, who could stare down aggressive investors and demanding shareholders with ice-cold composure. "I was going to surprise you," she said softly, setting down the boxes with careful precision. "Show up when you weren't expecting it and maybe help stock shelves for a while before you noticed. But I should have known you'd be watching those security cameras like a hawk." Eli reached over and deliberately switched off the security monitor, the screen going dark with a soft electronic sigh. "Some things," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of shared experience and hard-won wisdom, "are better left unseen." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning months of separation, weighted with shared history and deep understanding. They both knew intimately how public scrutiny had nearly destroyed them, how the hungry eyes of cameras and the judgment of strangers had turned their lives into a circus. They'd learned that genuine goodness flourished best in quiet moments, away from the glare of attention and the pressure to perform virtue rather than simply live it. Mrs. Henderson busied herself in the cereal aisle, humming along with the gospel music that continued to play softly overhead, giving them space while pretending not to watch their reunion with the keen interest of someone who'd witnessed their entire journey from the beginning. Golden October sunlight streamed through the front windows, catching the dust motes and dancing beams that made the whole store seem to glow with warm possibility. The light illuminated the small improvements they'd made, the hand-painted murals, the community bulletin board overflowing with thank you notes, the carefully arranged displays that spoke of pride and care rather than mere commerce. The old brass bell above the entrance door jingled with sudden enthusiasm as 8-year-old Lila burst through, her backpack bouncing and her face lighting up like Christmas morning at the sight of Charlotte. School had just let out, and she still wore the concentrated expression of someone who'd been thinking very hard about math problems and spelling tests. "You're back," she squealed with pure joy, launching herself across the store and into a hug that Charlotte readily returned, her own face transforming with surprised delight. "I missed you so much. Did you bring me any stories about the other stores you helped? Did you meet other kids like me?" "Better than stories," Charlotte laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. She reached into her canvas messenger bag, so different from the sharp leather briefcases she used to carry, and pulled out a small photo album. "I brought pictures of all the wonderful people I met, and some of them reminded me so much of you." Eli watched them together, his heart full, as he remembered how his daughter had been the very first person to see past Charlotte's carefully constructed defensive walls. Children often possess that rare gift, the ability to see the truth of people's hearts before adults could navigate past their own assumptions and prejudices. Lila had somehow known, even during those first tense days, that Charlotte's hardness was just protection for something soft and wounded underneath. The morning sun grew stronger as it climbed higher, filling the store with warm, honey-colored light that made everything seem touched by blessing. Charlotte caught Eli's eye over Lila's head as she opened the photo album, and they shared a smile that spoke volumes, a wordless conversation about journey and arrival, about loss and discovery, about the unexpected ways that grace could transform even the most unlikely hearts. Here, in this rebuilt store, with its second-chance dreams and its walls full of hope, they had all found something they didn't even know they were searching for. Faith in humanity's capacity for good, trust in grace to heal what seemed permanently broken, and the quiet miracle of becoming better versions of themselves through service to others. The brass bell over the door jingled once more as another customer entered, Mrs. Jackson with her weekly shopping list and her grandson in tow, bringing with them a fresh October breeze that ruffled the papers on the community board by the entrance. The board now overflowed with thank you notes written in children's careful handwriting, prayer requests from neighbors facing hard times, and small celebrations of neighborly kindness that happened every day in this little corner of the world where love had learned to bloom again. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.